here believes in emotional distress? Think about that for a moment. When a person inflicts such emotional turmoil in your life that the quality of life is literally and figuratively diminished, wouldn't you consider that a crime? It is a crime. In fact, lawyers make pretty good living litigating these types of cases under the label of pain and suffering. Now, according to infidelity recovery research, there are still infidelity laws in place in 17 out of the 50 states. And in case you were wondering or didn't know, North Carolina is one of those states. Now, I believe that infidelity and adultery, which I will be using interchangeably for the purpose of this speech, but I believe that not only should they be considered criminal offenses, but they should also carry fines and penalties in all of the states. Now, by the end of this speech, you'll not only have working knowledge and an appreciation for the fact that adultery is immoral. More than that, though, it causes lasting and a lot of times irreversible damage on the betrayed party. We're also going to discuss the fact that there are physical risks associated. Last and certainly not the least, we're going to talk about the fact that people are actually punished for committing acts that harm others as much as the betrayal of infidelity and adultery. But before we can get into that, let's unpack this briefcase by beginning to define what is adultery. So again, what is it? Merriam-Webster, the dictionary, would define adultery as the voluntary sexual intercourse that occurs between a married person and someone who is not their spouse. Guitar categorizes it in two categories. There is the emotional affairs or adultery, and then there is sexual adultery or infidelity. Now, in whichever case they occur, the betrayed party tends to feel a great deal of pain. Oftentimes, though, that pain is more intense when the betrayal is sexual in nature, and that's where my focus is going to be. So now that we talked about what it is, we're going to jump right into why it is criminal. Now, I understand that some may argue that infidelity is a poor choice, and I completely agree 100%. It is a poor choice. And while I agree with that, do you want to know what else is a poor choice? Murder. And I also want to point out that you know what else murder is? A crime. Just imagine and think for a moment of the damage and the emotional toll that it takes on the betrayed party when you violate them in that way. Now, I'm going to list some of those, and while I'm listing them, I want you to think about them, really, really meditate on them, and as you do that, you'll begin to understand why infidelity should be criminal. Now, we talked about the fact that it causes emotional distress, and it also causes long-term pain and suffering, similar to PTSD, according to Thaysen. Now, we haven't even gotten into the juicy parts of it yet. Did you know? And I know I mentioned it before in Hoarder's work. He mentions that the pain from infidelity can also, and oftentimes does trigger homicidal and suicidal tendencies. People actually want to kill themselves and others when they're betrayed like this. Now, according to Conley's article, infidelity poses some physical health risks because the unfaithful individuals are often less likely to have safer sex practices than those in an openly non-monogamous type of relationship, if I can get that out. Now, if you remove the sexy good time portions of the scenario, less than what I've mentioned has not only resulted in jail time, but has also won some serious money for individuals who have won those cases under that pain and suffering that we mentioned earlier. Now, some might also argue that divorce is enough of a penalty for this infidelity and adultery. Now, I also understand that, and I agree with that to some extent. While divorce may seem like it's the be-all to end all, it does not even begin to address the emotional turmoil and pain and suffering that is endured by the betrayed party. And after the marriage is over and resolved, that person who was betrayed oftentimes is still hurting. So divorce is not the be-all to end all. Now, we've mentioned that it causes pain and suffering. And if you're still wondering as to whether or not it's a crime, I'll just challenge you to reach out to one of those personal injury attorneys. And while you're at it, mention to them personal injury, and PTSD. And I bet you they'll tell you that they've won some cases about that. These are very real effects that occur and suffering that occur from the suffering induced at the hands of a cheater. Couldn't get that out there. Now, crimes of passion are also committed by either party as a result. And in many cases, they can be potentially deadly because people, they might not just want to beat you up, they might want to kill you or themselves. And if that's not enough, we've also talked about the health risks, which oftentimes can be deadly because syphilis and AIDS is still a thing. It kills, it certainly hurts. So those are some of the criminal elements. And let's not forget the fact that it's a breach of contract. If you do that kind of stuff at work, you can get fired. If you breach your contract of marriage, you can be fired from your marriage. And also, I want to throw it in there again that it is still, or there are still some laws in effect in 17 out of the 50 states. That sounds awfully redundant. Yes, but is it true? Still yes. So then, if we know all of that, why is it still prominent in this society? Perhaps, there's a social element that is to blame, social influence. My buddies are doing it, everybody's doing it, everybody made me do it. That's something that you may hear. Some may mention that the propensity towards casual sex is more prevalent in this day and age. Another reason that I believe that it happens is because there's no penalty for it. If nothing happens, then why would anyone stop? So what would be the point of criminalizing adultery? You're probably wondering, why would anyone care? It's a valid question, and I'll list some of those reasons for you. It's not pointless to criminalize adultery. Doing so could help restore some of the family values. I mean, people are breaking up, and it's so common today. Who doesn't want to be a part of preventing some of that traumatic stress? And if there were more penalties for adultery, a reduction in the act would occur, and that would reduce some of those negative outcomes like the self-esteem, homicidal tendencies, and anxiety. So why not begin the trend to ultimately end adultery? So by now you've heard all about adultery and how it's so much more than someone stepping out on their spouse. We discussed the fact that there are many criminal elements to it, to include the threat of physical harm, as well as the pain and suffering. The biggest takeaway that I want you to get from this is that in many contexts, traumatizing a person in this way is putting them at risk. It is punishable, and it should be punishable by law. And with this information, you can go forth and be the voice of reason. You can advocate for a person, and before you step out on that spouse, you can stop and think about what you're really, really doing. And you don't have to be a criminal. Thank you for your time.